As I said, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our August event. What I'd just like to do is share with you our very straightforward and simple agenda. So I will talk for a few minutes and introduce you to the World Sustainability Collective and give you some details. After that, Richard Templer will give his presentation, lasting approximately half an hour, 30 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session and a very, very brief wrap-up. And as I say, if you wish to continue the conversation after that hour, then we'll be here for about 25 minutes afterwards. So, the World Sustainability Collective, why do we do it? Its purpose is to unite sustainable businesses like yours worldwide and for you to gain a significant voice in the world's sustainability debate to make a greater collective impact than you would individually. This eclectic group of people and businesses will form a movement that educates and changes attitudes so that others will be inspired to join with sustainable business ideas of their own, and at the same time, it will improve your business performance and showcase your business to a global audience. What we do is, this is a not-for-profit, member-driven collective that supports delivery of the UN's 17 Sustainability Development Goals. You will be able to provide one another with support, form synergistic partnerships, and obtain business opportunities on your member web platform. Your business can benefit by improving business performance through the Build Business Better, Bigger, Bolder offering from quality experienced mentor support that provides value to your business in both delivery, scalability, and growth, as well as optimizing the scope of your original idea. How we do it is, as I said, through a member-driven collective, and you will inform the mentor program. The program will be delivered either as presentations or what we call learning circles. What those are up to a maximum of 10 members who will have a facilitated discussion in detail on a topic and agree individual action plans that members hold each other accountable for in their terms of their delivery. You have a mentor who can advise on ways to identify funding needs, how to approach funders, and introduction to funders that will support your growth plans. You have access to the member library of previous internal events and templates that support your business development. The web platform enables members to meet and peer mentor one another. You may develop synergistic partnerships or do business with other members. Eventually, it is intended that members will be able to hold an annual virtual global conference to showcase their businesses and attract key speakers. If this is of interest to you, then either join as a member now, and there is a link in the chat, or ask for a conversation for further information in a one-to-one with me after the event. Thank you very much indeed. So welcome, Richard. He is going to be talking to us this morning about atmospheric greenhouse gases removal. As I said earlier, please put your questions in the chat and we will address them in the following Q&A session. So Professor Richard Templer holds a joint appointment with the Department of Chemistry at Imperial College London and the Grantham Institute. He is the Director of Innovation at the Grantham Institute and the founder of their Centre for Climate Change Innovation, a collaboration with the Royal Institution. He is the current Hoffman Chair in Chemistry and is a member of the London Sustainability Development Commission and advisory body to the Mayor of London. Professor Templer advises a number of national programs in climate innovation in Germany and Denmark, and works with private investors in climate innovation in an effort to support the acceleration of the transition to a sustainable and resilient low-carbon society. Welcome, Richard. I'll just stop screen sharing for a moment. And if you would like to share your screen, then you can start your presentation.
Right. So it's a pleasure to be invited to give this talk, and a special shout out to I got to get your name right, Nicole Keeler in Illinois, who is watching this at the ungodly hour now. What is it? 2:09 in the morning. So I hope that this will keep you awake, but then immediately afterwards you'll be able to fall into a beautiful and deep sleep. I'm going to talk about greenhouse gas removal. So when I was putting the talk together, I sort of realized this is quite an area that seems to have suddenly exploded onto the scene over the last 2 years, but I've been involved with it for a decade, I realized. And so there's a lot of things that I felt were probably worthwhile saying, which are largely informational, but I will get on to things which are to do with opinions about the possible benefits, the possible challenges, and indeed problems associated with greenhouse gas removal. So I'm not going to give you any sort of outline of the talk. I'm just going to get straight into it and start off with just a kind of something that I thought you should probably know, which is that I am part of this assemblage in the UK. Let me get that little laser pointer thingy. Right. So I'm part of this thing, CO2RE, which is the Greenhouse Gas Removal Hub. We act on behalf of this program, which is a UK government-funded program, which has 5 demonstrators in it. These 5 demonstrators at the bottom, which are looking at the removal of greenhouse gas, in fact, the removal of carbon dioxide to be specific, using biochar, peat, forests, rock weathering, and bioenergy crops. So it's not everything in the field that you could possibly do. It's all rather focused on nature. But in fact, the UK government has also given a large amount of funding to other methodologies, and in particular to some hubs, some clusters where greenhouse gas removal is being done with more industrial methodologies. And I'll talk both about what are called nature-based, don't particularly like that name, but nature-based approaches and more industrial processes in the presentation. Anyway, these are all things which have got websites you can go to, and I urge you to go and have a look to see what's going on. Bill mentioned that I've been doing things for other countries as well, so Denmark and Germany. Those countries are also doing things in this area, and you can go and look at things in America. There's an organization called Carbon 180 that's a wonderful source of information on what's going on in the US and more widely. And indeed, I'm sure that you'll find activities going on in Japan and Canada and. So do go and have a look to see what the world is doing, because there's a lot of activity going on at the moment. Okay, so I said this is going to be about greenhouse gas removal. So what on earth is that? So that is to do with capturing and then storing man-made greenhouse gases after they've escaped into the atmosphere. And in fact, when they escape into the atmosphere, they will also reach equilibrium by dissolving into water, and specifically the ocean. So that CO2 that we let go, for example, is distributed between the atmosphere and the ocean. But in fact, there are other greenhouse gases that are out there. And they are out there in reasonably significant quantities. Something like 20% of the greenhouse gas equivalents, the CO2 equivalents, come from methane, nitrous oxide, and a much smaller quantity from the chlorofluorocarbons. So Methane and nitrous oxide. I'm going to ignore the chlorofluorocarbons just for the sake of time, just to say that they're the sort of things that are in various industrial processes as solvents, but also within cooling systems, within air conditioning systems. There's more methane and nitrous oxide in the atmosphere than chlorofluorocarbons. What you'll notice if you've done chemistry at some point in your life is that they're more reactive than carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is a focus because there's a lot of it in the atmosphere, causing the trapping of heat through the greenhouse effect, but it's not very reactive. It's going to be there a long time. Methane, as you know, is pretty reactive. So although its impact is, I think it's something like 32 times more greenhouse gas impact than carbon dioxide, it's there in smaller quantities and it disappears more rapidly. Nitrous oxide is even more potent as a greenhouse gas, but it's also reactive. So the things that I'm going to focus on is carbon dioxide, but please, these other things are actually important. And for anybody who's interested in doing something in the area, these are gases that at the moment are being ignored in greenhouse gas removal. Okay, so just to be absolutely clear, the big challenge is one that I've already kind of mentioned, which is that once these gases get out into the atmosphere, they are no longer concentrated. So the values I've given on the left-hand side here, this 14 to 33%, that's the concentration of CO2 in cement manufacturing. So coming out of the stack. So it's really very concentrated there. Whereas once it gets out into the atmosphere, at the moment we're at 400 parts per million, which is 0.4% concentration. So it just means you have to do a lot less separation of other gases from carbon dioxide to capture them when they come out of an industrial process. So we've got a significant issue in greenhouse gas removal when it's atmospheric greenhouse gas removal because of the low concentration. Okay, so before I get into anything at all to do with the greenhouse gas removal processes that people are looking at, I just want to start off with a kind of a set of principles, and they are in order of priority. Well, at least at the beginning, they're in order of priority. The first of those priorities is avoid emitting greenhouse gases. That's, as you know, is called mitigation. I just call it stop burning stuff. All right, the most effective way to get to grips with climate change, and the thing that we absolutely have to do in priority with anything else, is to stop burning stuff and emitting these the greenhouse gases, CO2. There are activities, and we'll talk about some of them, where you can't prevent these emissions. And what you might want to do then is, if they're industrial and they're localized, for example, in steel manufacture or cement manufacturers, to capture them at source, because that's when they're most concentrated. So that's a better place to do it. So that's your second priority. And then for those things, those gases, the CO2 that's got out into the atmosphere, either because they're there historically, we've already done it and it's too late, or because they come from diffuse sources. So, for example, as permafrost tundra thaws, large amounts of methane will be emitted. Agricultural activity, the fertilization of soil does produce nitrous oxide emissions. So does the use of your cars. All of these are sources of emission which are diffuse. They're spread out all over the place. So that's harder stuff. So that's the next priority. And I put it at the bottom, but frankly, it could have been done kind of perpendicular to these things, which is we've already got extreme weather events from climate change with us. So we have to learn to live with climate change. So we've got to try and put the brakes on. We're very late to the game. So we're going to have to learn to live with it while we put the brakes on. So this is the kind of key principle, and I guess it's the one at the top here. I don't want you to go away and think that removing carbon dioxide emissions from chimneys and from the air is a useful and a complete substitution for mitigating their emission. It's not. It won't work. I can talk about that later on if you like. You're going to have to do that as well as you can to start with. Okay, now I get to more of the details. So there are still people arguing about whether we need to remove atmospheric greenhouse gases. This data is from the IPCC. So this is the group that advises governments by looking at all the published data that's out there on climate change and comes to conclusions about what needs to happen. I'll go through this graph because it's quite complicated. So this gray stuff over here, and you can see it kind of is projected up here. This, by the way, this publication was in 2015, hence this dotted line at 2015. And what it's showing you is the annual emissions of CO2, and you can see they're rising. And there was a little blip downwards, obviously, in during the pandemic, but it's rising again. So we are not putting the brakes on. This curve needs to start doing what it's showing here. It needs to start doing this if we're going to achieve just 1.5 degrees of global warming. And we already know what 1 degree of global warming looks like. So that extra 0.5 degree should probably scare you. It certainly scares me. So this is the projection using these integrated assessment models of what you can do. And the bottom line, the thing that really matters is a bit here, that all of the integrated assessment models, every single one of them, tells us that we're going to require what are called negative emissions to limit warming by 1.5 degrees centigrade. If you go to 2 degrees, it's about 87% of the models say you need negative emissions. Therefore, you would assume that you're going to need negative emissions even for 2 degrees centigrade. And negative emissions simply means processes that don't emit net but absorb CO2 net and keep it removed from the atmosphere. And this set of models here is showing that you're going to need to do this where this arrow is. And look where it is. It's at about 2030 something or other. So that is within, we're hopefully all going to be alive when this needs to happen. This needs to happen very soon. This is really challenging. We're in 2022. In about 8 years' time, we're going to have to see some of these techniques that we're going to talk about in the real world doing the job. And you can see this line. This is the net emissions here, and this light blue stuff here is the negative emissions. It's what's pulling things down, because you can see this darker blue curve here, which is the stuff that you can't stop emitting. All right. So from fossil fuel industry, land use change, and so on, all these things that we're going to find difficult to do, that's what this curve here, this sandwich between where we need to be and where we are is. And that's going to be taken care of by this light blue bit here, which is us pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. Okay, or from the chimney stacks. All right. So let's move on with this. So just to summarize, to be really clear, so we need greenhouse gas removals for 2 reasons. One of them is to manage the difficult to mitigate sectors. So steel, cement, aviation, agriculture, and no doubt there are other industries as well, which are less large than these ones. In other words, their contribution is less than these ones, but which will also need negative emissions. In fact, never say never. So for example, this area here of cement, there are technologies emerging which suggest that we might be able to actually make the production of cement net negative without having to do atmospheric removals. People are doing things with steel where they're using hydrogen rather than coking coal and gas to make the steel. So there are things going on. There are electric planes being produced and so on and so forth. Agriculture is always going to be more difficult. But anyway, I'm going to leave this as it stands. Within the space of 8 years, we're not going to have solved all these things. Within the space of 20 years, we're not going to have solved all these things. So we need to be really paying some attention to this. Then the second point, which is the more depressing point, which is that we are missing our emissions reduction targets. We are knowingly now underperforming. And the real fear is that we're going to undergo some dramatic, irreversible climate tipping points, and the Earth's climate will therefore change, and that will cause really traumatic changes to the biosphere and to society. That's really the one that keeps me awake at night. Okay, enough of the gloomy warnings. What are the routes to greenhouse gas removal? And this is for carbon dioxide only. And I am talking about greenhouse gas removal from the atmosphere, right? There's a sort of, I know it's a bit weird, but GGR for greenhouse gas removal means the stuff that's out there and diffuse already. And if I just put my my pointer here, CCS, carbon capture and storage, or sometimes carbon capture use and storage, CCUS or CCS, that is meant to imply taking carbon dioxide from point emissions where it's still concentrated. So that's the difference between this and this. But of course, they are connected. They will speak to each other. Anyway, so I've written a row here, which is about the method of capture done at the very high level. So the most obvious way of removing carbon dioxide is to use plants, to use flora. And that uses photosynthesis in every case. So forestation, bioenergy crops, all of them are basically just using photosynthesis, where carbon dioxide and water are photoactivated, light activated, in order to produce hydrocarbons, sugars, and oxygen. And those sugars are made into polymers, which make this thing down here, which is the storage vehicle, biomass. Okay, so ultimately you convert gaseous CO2 into biomass, into wood or whatever it happens to be. I can see there's somebody in the audience who's working on, what was it? I was going to say kelp, but it's not kelp. Is it cannabis? Is it cannabis? I think it might have been actually hemp. So hemp, for example, is a biomass product. So you can store it in biomass. You can make products out of that. So I'm sitting at a wooden desk. So that's a biomass product of the simplest variety, but there are many other things you can do with it as well. Then more intriguingly, there are a lot of carbon is stored in the soil. And trees actually have a very rich and complicated bio colony around them, made up of all sorts of fungi, and those fungi help to store lots of carbon in the soil. So photosynthesis is the original trigger, but then things get, the carbon gets moved around and put in a variety of different places in nature, and we do it by making furniture, for example. We've also got this idea that you can burn it. So you can burn it, which seems a bit counterintuitive, but by burning it, you concentrate the CO2, and then you take the CO2 and you do carbon capture and storage, which means you take the carbon dioxide and you put it down a hole in the ground, where eventually it will mineralize and it will stably be stored underground for geological periods of time. And if you look at where the storage locations are, land, the sea, the lithosphere, the crust of the earth, and in materials that we use. So you can find a lot of places to store this stuff. But you might want to think, when you look at this, about the processes that you use and what impact they may have and how long you can store it for. Well, then I've put another section called minerals. So this is largely speaking, at the moment, people are looking at enhanced weathering. So weathering is what happens when carbon dioxide dissolves in water and rains down on rocks. And that carbonic acid that's formed produces carbonate ions. It dissolves the rock, produces carbonate ions, and those carbonate ions are stable, and they will flow out in rivers and out into the sea, and they will eventually get made into the shells of mollusks, and then those mollusks dies, they sink to the bottom of the sea, and you get limestone and all the rest of it. So that's a way that the planet has used in the past to remove CO2. And the idea is, can you accelerate this? And the way to accelerate this is to take rocks and to grind them up. So there's lots of surface area for the carbonic acid to contact, and in particular to use very young rocks like the basalts, which come out of volcanic explosions, and to use those rocks to give you lots of sponge, if you like, lots of ways of soaking up the carbonic acid and then and weathering and removing CO2. The other way of doing this is called ocean alkalization. Well, I call it ocean alkalization. It's basically taking the ocean and just putting some alkalinity. So you could put lime into the ocean, for example. And what that does is it causes the carbonate ions to crash out. They precipitate out as a solid and go to the bottom of the ocean where they are stored. The storage vehicle in all of these cases ends up being carbonate minerals of some form or another. And the storage places, the locations are land, the oceans, the lithosphere. The last one is if you like, where the industrial stuff happens. And I've just classified that as chemicals because it all involves chemistry. It's called direct air capture. There's a lot of things going on in the area. The starting point, there are other things, but the starting point where work began on this was using amines. So there's a whole bunch of different amines. So that's NHX groups, and they've got some kind of hydrocarbon groups stuck onto them, and you can try all sorts of different arrangements. The idea is that these, if you suck in the air and pass it over the amine or through the amine if it's a liquid, then what happens is those carbon dioxide molecules, some of them get stuck onto the amines, and then you can remove them later on from the amines under high temperatures and pressure. So you can capture and then release. And when you release them, you've now got pure CO2, and you can just, again, do CCS with them. Well, you have to capture them. We know it's already been captured, but you can store it geologically. So you can also, however, use it to make chemicals and materials. So you can make polycarbonate, you can make all sorts of things which will hold on to the carbon for significant periods of time. And just again, to be consistent, you can this allows you to store stuff in these locations. So broadly speaking, that's everything that I know about that's out there. There's a lot of activity going on in this purple column, and there are reasons for that. Will I talk about them? Yes, I will talk about them in the next. I think I'll show you the next slide. So this next slide was from a report from the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering, where a group of experts went and had a look at what was out there, and some of which I've already described, for removing atmospheric greenhouse gas. And you don't need to look at this too closely, but when you've got the time and you want to look back at it, please go ahead. It's a very good report as well if you want to go and look at it. What they've done here is this arc from here to here is stuff that they said was ready for deployment. So it involves forestation, habitat restoration, soil carbon sequestration, building with biomass, in other words, building with more wood. And they put low carbon concrete. I would say that was still something which was not commercially proven, at least. But anyway, so about a third, maybe just slightly over a quarter, actually, they reckoned was ready for deployment. Then there's a great big arc here, and that was to do with direct air capture, right? The purple column I showed you, and the bioenergy with carbon capture and storage that I showed you. So these they have as being big things that we can do, right? Can make a big impact on the UK's CO2 emissions, but it requires carbon capture and storage. So that thing about putting it down a hole and storing it, that was stalled by government. These programs were going on, and then they removed funding from those programs. And then over here, they've got much lower scale. They've got biochar and this weathering, and they said this is not yet demonstrated at scale. So in other words, there's a lot, most of this, which is not happening yet. There's stuff to be done. And I'm not entirely confident, frankly, about some of these things over here. And I'm happy to talk about those when we break. Okay, so what are the big challenges? I'm going to race through now because I've got probably another 4 or 5 minutes to go. What are the big challenges? So the first, the one that should make you kind of go, oh my God, or if you're an entrepreneur, make you go, ooh, excellent, is that we probably need to permanently remove something like 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide from the air this century. That's for the whole globe, not just the UK. So it's a huge challenge, but of course that means it's going to be a big bloody industry. So the people who make this happen will be a totally novel and a totally important industry for us. The next challenge is we need to do this while we're doing that mitigation stuff, and we're being hit by extreme weather. And that's going to have an effect on the money supply, but even more importantly, we can't do any of these things actually without energy. And as you're making the transition, you're not going to have enough energy to do everything. So everything with renewable energy. So you're going to have to make decisions about what you do and don't do. And that's going to be a significant pressure. And the analog is what Germany and many other European countries are thinking about what they need to do when it comes to the use of gas this winter. All right, we're going to be facing some tough decisions. The next thing is we need to avoid collateral damage from greenhouse gas removal. Planting forests, for example, sounds like a lovely, cuddly thing to do, and it's really easy, and it's not. There are all sorts of challenges. And one of the big ones is collateral damage, is that you actually damage biodiversity rather than enhancing biodiversity. And biodiversity is under huge stress at the moment. And if you think we can survive with lots of species extinction, good luck. It's not a planet I would favor living on. And that leads on to the next one, which is the public know very little about all this stuff. And when we do ask them, we get, in many cases, negative responses, largely, I think, because they don't know what this stuff is and it scares them, and quite understandably. So we need to bring the public on board in order that we do not waste time doing things that nobody wants to have done. And then the last two things deal with politics. So we need policies and regulations like crazy because we have no real markets. We only have voluntary markets at the moment, and those are driven by industries who are wanting to go net zero, and many of them are buying snake oil at the moment to make that happen. So some of the best companies recognize this and have set up consortia and initiatives that are determined to fund high quality removals. By that I mean ones that don't do damage, which don't hurt society, and which are permanent, which really do remove this stuff and not just take it out of the air for a day and then return it, which is not what you need. So there's lots of stuff going on. This is a Wild West. This is not a stable market, and it needs stuff doing very quickly. So some of the gritty challenges, I've just chosen things, all right? This is not comprehensive. So I talked a little bit about plant-based solutions. they look nice, but if you make serried ranks of trees to absorb CO2, you will lose biodiversity. You need mixed forest. It doesn't grow as fast. So you need to moderate your plans for sucking CO2 out of the air with Sitka spruce. You need to really think this through. And of course, we've all seen forests burning down. This is no guarantee that you're going to keep this carbon locked away forever, because climate change is going to bite you in the backside. And we need this CO2 removed permanently, not for 10 years. It takes 30 years for the absorption of CO2 in trees to generally to saturate. So it'll take 30 years anyway. And then you need to know what you're going to do with that woody material in order to really get it stored away. So there's lots of things, in my opinion, to still be done in order for plant-based solutions to do a good job. And what I haven't said either is just think about how much we need to remove and how many forests that requires. We can't do this just with biomass. Mineral-based solutions, so there are the rock weathering and indeed the ocean alkalinity, untested, as the report says, and therefore it will take time because we've got to do this stuff safely. Changing the alkalinity of the ocean is something you just can't go ahead and do for quite obvious reasons. You're tampering with a natural ecosystem, and that's dangerous. So we need to take careful steps. And the other thing which is really weird about it, although in many ways this is the way nature did it in the past, actually measuring how much CO2 you've removed is really difficult. It's not clear to me that it's obvious how to do it yet, and that could be problematic. And then the chemical approaches, well, at the moment they're pretty damned expensive, and my last slide will show that. And we need rapid scaling of the geological storage, in other words, the CCS, sorry. And the other thing is that this is the one that the public fear. All right, this is one where we need more explanation. We need to bring public on board, and we need to be cognizant of the potential problems that lie ahead there. Okay, my last slide is this is now very opinionated. This is me telling you that if I really wanted to remove, properly and permanently remove carbon dioxide that I'd emitted, this is what I would do. So this is a collaboration between the company Climeworks, which is a company from Switzerland. They started at the same time that I started in this area, so I know a few of the people there. And Carbfix, which a company I don't know, but they're from Iceland. And Climeworks are the guys who suck the CO2 out of the air. Carbfix are the people who know about geology and can store this down holes. These guys, Carbfix, now know that they can permanently store the CO2 within 2 years. So within 2 years, the CO2 has mineralized down these holes. Climeworks obviously know they can do the removal, and they're in Iceland because they can use geothermal energy, so they are not burning fossil fuels to make this happen. And this assemblage here is called Orca. It's the biggest direct air capture system in the world, which is a bit sad because that's 4,000 tons per annum. All right, remember I said 1 trillion tons. Go and work it out for yourselves. This is a tiny step, an important but a tiny step. You can buy a ton of removed CO2 and you can be assured it really is removed. And it costs something like $800 per ton if you do a deal with them. But you can go to their website and do it. So that's, if you like, that's the closest I think we are to actually what I would call the gold standard removals. There's a long way to go. So this may be the end of my talk, but it's only the beginning of this story. Thank you.
Sorry, Richard, I was muted. Richard, that was really, really fascinating. And thank you very much indeed for focusing our minds on the challenges that we've got and some of the routes to finding more permanent solutions. Perhaps you could stop sharing your screen and we'll start to take some questions from the audience. I think that we've got a couple from Andrew Gill and one from Matthew Swain and one from Chloe. Let me just check, I think. So we'll start. Andrew, perhaps you ask your first question and then we'll let Matthew and Chloe ask theirs, and then we'll come back to you for your second question. So if you mute yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much, Bill. That's a very, very interesting talk. Slightly depressing, I fear, but very interesting. The world seems to be getting increasingly disorderly. And I wonder whether, not just geopolitically, but in terms of people's willingness to actually listen. And I wonder, there's no golden bullet, but how do we get a head of steam behind these things? You just said government seems to have pulled the plug on carbon capture and storage, going the opposite direction. So how do we actually generate that pull for these kind of things when the world seems to be basically going down the pan?
Oh goodness, Andrew, that is such a massive question, because it pertains not just to this; it pertains to, frankly, to almost every innovation that can cope with climate change. There are still people who are in denial that it's happening, even with with my part of the world, the air temperature got to 40 degrees a couple of weeks ago, which is so unheard of in the UK that it should make your hair stand on end. So there are people who are in denial. We also know that there have been industries, and there continue to be industries, who are spending a lot of time and a lot of money persuading governments not to do anything. On the other side, there are protest movements that have blocked traffic and are trying to keep this in the public eye. Those competing forces are going to have to be resolved, and I think the only way I feel that we really can get action is for those of us in democracies to hold our politicians to account and to make absolutely sure that we tell them that we need them to create the political background, the policy background, the regulational background that's required to take on this challenge. The weird thing that's going on at the moment is that there are a number of businesses who I think are for real, big corporates who are wanting to do the right thing and taking initiatives. But the problem is these are, one, they're all voluntary. They are having an impact, but they're all voluntary. But two, it's a weird thing, right? They have not been elected. They're doing what I think are the right things, hopefully, but then they're not being held to account by the public. They're being held to account by their staff and, probably more importantly, by their shareholders. Something weird has happened to the world where politicians no longer see it as their role to keep us, their voter base, safe. So this is not a really very good answer, but I think somewhere amongst these competing forces, us, the if you like, the majority, we need to make our opinions clear. So, for example, I'll finish off very quickly with the election of the leader of the Conservative Party, who will be our next Prime Minister. They dropped climate change off the bottom of their list. They're playing to an audience of about 150,000 people who are average age 55, some of whom don't believe in climate change or the necessity to do anything. So they're talking about wokery and all sorts of irrelevant nonsense when the world is burning up around them. It's bizarre. They all need to be told by the general electorate they need to protect us. They need to get on with it.
Thank you, Richard. Just to sort of comment, I mean, the World Sustainability Collective does have a purpose to try and gain enough members so that we can influence that debate positively, one hopes. Matthew, you have a question Perhaps you'd unmute yourself and ask Richard your question, please.
Sure, hi everyone, and hi Richard, lovely to see you again. Richard, I'm just thinking about the commercial opportunities. I mean, obviously, a lot of the solutions need to be privately financed. I mean, where are we with that? And also, is there? I mean, you've mentioned the Operation Iceland, which looks very impressive, but as you say, it's still quite small. I mean, are there already established levels of operating and scale that you need to achieve before it becomes viable as an operation?
No, I think it would be fair to say I can see somebody else has asked about kelp, so I'm going to concatenate the answer to all of these things. This is not an industry with a commercial market. It's an industry which has a scientific market. We know we've got to do this stuff. So people have got on and innovators and entrepreneurs have got on and started to do things in this area. And there are customers in the voluntary market for this. Microsoft will buy carbon removals. Stripe, who are real leaders in the area, will buy carbon removals, even at $800 a ton. All right. And they're all doing that in order to enable this community of innovators to drive the cost down and therefore drive prices down. And they're all hoping for something along the lines of $100 a ton. That's essentially what they're hoping for. Now, biological methods like forestation, I don't know actually the prices of kelp, I'm afraid, David, but I would imagine that kelp farming would be similar sort of prices. These are sub $100 a ton. The problem they've got is the security of storage. How long does that CO2 remain removed and stored away? And how much can you actually do before the system saturates? Kelp actually grows really quickly, so people are very interested in it at the moment. They're interested in sargassum as well. These, of course, are all things which are they're all offshore, and that means there's all sorts of international laws about what you can and can't do and the permissions you need, so all of which are wise laws. Right? They're not there for just to interfere. They're there to try and ensure that we don't wreck the oceans and the biosphere in the oceans. So these things are all at a really early stage. Clearly, scale will make a big difference, and learning will make a big difference. So I would say, Matthew, that all of our learning from the mitigation technologies that we've got, like photovoltaics, is actually the prices, the learning curve for these things was much steeper. In other words, costs descended much more rapidly than anybody expected. I believe the same will happen here. There's no reason to not believe that the same will happen here. But it requires persistence and a lot of capital to make those things happen. At the moment, we're at the very beginning of all of this. And so it's quite Wild Westy. And so people of, impact investors with a touch of bravery need to get involved. And they have emerged, which is great. And we need governments to set up the policies and the regulations for markets. And I'll maybe say what I think that means. At the moment, CO2, anthropogenic CO2, is not classed as a pollutant, which is remarkable since it's a pollutant. As soon as you classify it as a pollutant, all sorts of regulations occur, including things like the polluter pays. That has all sorts of benefits. So clearly, because if you're a polluter, you want to pay as little as you can. If you're having to pay $800 a ton, you're probably going to think, geez, can I reduce my emissions? It drives the market in the right direction. Governments haven't done anything along this line for pretty obvious reasons. The oil and gas sector and others have been whispering in their ears and giving them inducements not to change. And shame on them.
Richard, Chloe, I'll invite to ask her question in a minute. But before she does, She's asking about policies. You just comment on that. So let's find out what else she wishes to raise about that. Gullum's also asked a question around climate change. If we're really serious about it, why are there no laws and regulations? So Chloe, can you ask your question of Richard, please?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, I know you just started to talk about the policy, so that was actually the perfect lead into the question. But are there any other top few policies, I suppose, in your mind as well that the UK needs to urgently implement in relation to GGR? I know it's a very specific, in your opinion, kind of question. So if you could add anything else, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
In fact, Chloe, Dawn Johnson has written a really interesting thing, which I forgot to actually say, which I think is incredibly important. So I'm going to put at the top of my list education. So the evidence of my conversations with CEOs of large multinationals is that their kids are holding their feet to the fire. And one can never underestimate children who you love asking you why on earth you're doing the things that you're doing. And that means children need to be equipped with enough knowledge that they can do that with acuity. The other thing, so policies that derive from an acknowledgement that anthropogenic CO2 is a pollutant, I think would be really helpful. The other thing that I think is really, really important, Chloe, is a measurement, regulation, and verification. So I said snake oil is being bought at the moment, and what I meant by that is people are buying, carbon offsets and carbon removals. It's all got blended together in a horrible way with afforestation projects. There is, for example, no single register that holds all of the information of all of the forestation that's going on, that has said, these 15 trees belong to Richard Templar. This is his bit. They can be, on a different database, they may be being sold again. We don't measure the amount of carbon in the trees terribly accurately, so we use some rather crude approximations. There are people with technologies coming out of my accelerator who are finding ways of measuring it more accurately so that you can get a good handle on it. And then verification, actually somewhere that verifies that this carbon this year is still there and may have increased by this much. It's all very, very boring, but incredibly important. We need to have a carbon accountancy, that's reliable out there to really tell us how much we've removed and remained stored.
Thank you, Richard. Gullum, does that answer your question too? Okay. Just a quick comment from me, Richard. There's a company called Happy Carbon, Gary Adland's company, and his idea is, in fact, he's specifically looking at carbon offsets. And what he wants to achieve is to have a carbon offset register, which is very similar to what you just said about, what we don't want is to be selling the same trees sort of time and time again. So it's early stages. He's not only going to have the register associated with the UN, but he's also going to be able to identify a particular area that is being used as an offset in the register. And hopefully, double counting or triple counting or whatever it is today would be a thing of the past. So people are starting to think along the lines that you are suggesting, but I agree, we're a long, long way away from having...
As some of you may know, because David's got his hands up, but as some of you may know, the blockchain fanatics have been concentrating on this stuff, and I think it's actually a great idea, but they've recognized there needs to be a singular methodology, singular place where all this data is stored, and also they need to decarbonize their own. They need to they need to increase the energy efficiency of the blockchain, which apparently they have done, although I'm not an expert. So yes, that's all absolutely desperately needed.
Okay, so at the moment I can see two questions. So Andrew, we'll come back to you after David's asked this question.
Excellent, thanks, Bill. Yeah, it's just following up from what you were saying on standards, Richard. We've entered this market a couple of years ago. We're working with the British Standards Institute with PAS 2060. It is a recognised standard internationally now. It's the only standard actually recognised for carbon neutrality. But we're finding the market is completely saturated with companies that have got their own standards. They mark their own homework. The problem you've got is they actually look really credible because they've been in the industry for some time now. I won't name drop any of them, but I'm sure we all know who they are. They've got their own set of standards. They mark their own homework. They give you their little green footprint to stick on your website, and off people go. And only this morning, you know, ASOS and Amazon, ASOS and Asda's, and some of the big corporates are already being investigated by the CMA. Again, claims of greenwashing because they've been given really bad and wrong advice. Yep. And there's too many of these companies out there just marking their own homework and stamping standards without any regulation.
I don't need to say anything to that. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's what I meant by the Wild West, and it's not, you know, it's snake oil and all the rest of it. I think the other thing, which is maybe David, is a subtlety. It's not a subtlety. I mean, it's incredibly important, but it's not out there yet, and that is permanent. In other words, if you want to buy a removal, an offset which is actual removal, I know how many tons I've removed, exactly matching what I've measured, my factory, and that for me would be responsible removal agent. And you know, that's the gold standard. I don't think it is actually. I lots more than that one. What I see is, you know, you're told you can offset your fleet by, you know, forestation project, and boring and probably irritating my friends by saying, you know, a tree to grow, that there's like from a sap to absorb the tons you emitted by flying in Australia, and you know they don't all bloody time, and we don't have the CO2 removed in years. We need it now. All right,
that's the problem. You've got deforestation with the FSC for 25, and the Forest Stewardship Council and plant a sapling, and that sapling won't have. Yeah. And there's a good chance in that 30-year period it's going to be or burnt down. So planting trees is not the answer.
In fact, maybe I will say this, if you don't mind. The group of us, and in fact, I think actually every one of those demonstrations showed you, it is our belief from all the data we've got. In fact, you know, reforestation and so really important, most important from the of reducing or trying to avoid biodiversity loss. Focus on that, and then you get the collateral benefit of having removed CO2 as well. Do not concentrate on that. Concentrate on loss.
Richard, we've reached the end. Thank you indeed for your presentation and the Q&A. For those people who've asked questions, but we haven't got round to them yet, Richard has agreed that he'll make every effort to answer them, and we'll send you back his answers. I recognise, Richard, you're very busy at the moment doing lots of things, but thank you for that offer, and we'll see how we get on with that. Is membership something that may be of interest to you? Then Yulia's put a link in the chat, and we'd be very happy to welcome you as members. But also, if you want any more information, I'd be very happy to have a one-to-one with any of you. So just put that request in the chat. If you wish to stay and continue to talk to us and to other people on the presentation, then please stay. As I say, we'll be here if necessary until 9:25 hard stop. But I'd just like to again to say thank you to Richard, and thank you to you, all the people who have come and attended our event today. We intend to have another event in September. We haven't arranged the date or the speaker yet, but we will send you that information as soon as we can over the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much indeed. Bye.
Thanks, Bill. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, Richard.